now retired from business and teaches in both the School of Theology and the Graduate School of Management at the University of Dallas. The University of Dallas is a prestigious university in the United States. He's a frequent speaker at conferences throughout the United States and in England, Italy, and Romania. In addition to his 2 books, he has articles in 8 others published books. He is the leading authority on the subject of the political economy of distributism. By distributism, we mean the priority of distributive justice in an economy and the necessity of the widespread distribution of productive property. Indeed, the first prerequisite of a free market is that production of any commodity be spread to a wide number of firms, and that the basis of an economy is production and not finance. Professor Médaille returns to Romania and to ASE to introduce the Romanian translation of his book and to learn more about how the change from communism, liberalism, and globalism have affected Romania. And now I have the pleasure and honor to introduce to you Mr. John Médaille.
And thank you very much to the Academy for inviting me back once again. It is always a great pleasure for me. One of the wonderful things that have happened to me since I entered this field is learning about Romania. And I'm here for the second time, and I hope that it won't be the last time. It is puzzling to note that somewhere between 4 million and 8 million Romanians have left the country. Indeed, Traian Băsescu has estimated the number as high as 12 million. This is out of a country of 22 million, which means that somewhere between 18 and 36% of the population has left the country. Now, to what can I compare that number? Think of this. In Ireland, between the years 1845 and 1852, 1 million people died and another million immigrated, out of a total of 8 million people, or 25% of the population. But Ireland was an oppressed country, occupied by foreigners, and in the midst of a great national tragedy, the potato famine. That is to say, the kind of immigration we see in Romania is the kind that one would normally associate with war, famine, and oppression. But there would seem to be no great tragedy in Romania that caused so many of her children to flee. Nor in this land of fertile fields and skillful farmers is there any famine. Indeed, it was not oppression, but the end of oppression that seemed to start the exodus. So we may ask, why, for so many of her children, did freedom for Romania mean freedom to leave Romania? Why, for so many Romanians, did a better life mean a life outside of Romania? One is tempted to respond, Romania is a poor country. But the next question is, why isn't Romania rich? When we see a poor society, we might ask whether their poverty is natural. Perhaps, like the vast Sahara, God did not give that land the gifts upon which wealth depends. But when we look at a land like Romania, we see fertile plains and valleys, verdant pastures, rivers full of fish, mountains full of minerals. We see a land with vast natural wealth, with every sort of blessing a loving God could bestow upon a nation. The problem, then, cannot be with God. Hence, it must be with man. If man has made the farmer the slave of the banker, then man can fix the problem. If a nation has indebted itself to foreign powers, it can find its own freedom. It can build truly free markets and not the capitalist simulacrum. It can build truly free men and not the mythical economic man or Soviet man. It can build true citizens living in real families and real cities based on real wealth, not financial wealth. And it can do all this if it really wants to. There is nothing that stands in the way of such a nation but itself. So, what is standing in Romania's way? So much so that many find they must leave to become waitresses in Italy or strawberry pickers in Spain. Allow me to suggest that what is missing is a Romanian solution to Romania's problems. For centuries, being Romanian, or at least being part of the Romanian elite, often meant looking outward rather than inward. Now, here I must beg your pardon in advance, since I am venturing far beyond my expertise to offer some casual and perhaps superficial observations about the Romanian character, and I hope I do not give offense. But it seems to me, perhaps from less than sufficient evidence, that there is a kind of humility in the Romanians. Perhaps it is a result of centuries of living under rulers who were not Romanian, when deference to foreigners was a survival skill. And as a student of the Romanian language, there seems to be, from the standpoint of an English speaker, a heavy reliance on the passive voice, the subjunctive mood, and the reflexive mode. Now, humility is a virtue. No real learning can take place without deference to the sources of knowledge. However, when it becomes a survival skill, and when this skill becomes a philosophical habit, there is danger that one may miss the gifts one has by always thinking that the gifts of others are so much better. And so it is, or at least it seems to me, that the Romanians have too often followed ideas which have not worked well for Romania for the simple reason that they have not worked well anywhere. But since these ideas had prestige in foreign capitals, they came to have prestige with the Romanian elites as well. As an example, let me point to you a curious parallel. In the last days of the tyrant's reign, Ceausescu starved his people to pay the foreign debt. Now, look at the situation in Europe today. And we find that the solution proposed for Greece is that she should starve her people to pay the foreign debt. That is to say, what communism accomplished with tanks and the Securitate, finance capitalism accomplishes with bombs and bankers. But at least Ceausescu accomplished his goal. The new liberal government took office without owing a leu to anyone. I am not here to defend the tyrant in any way. But I do know that at least Ceausescu came to realize that all the loans from Washington formed a trap, and he did not wish to exchange control from Moscow with control from Washington. Ceausescu realized what the Greeks are only now learning. What a person gets from production is proportional to what he contributes to production. Here I am thinking of justice as a mere practical necessity, for without it, markets cannot clear. Demand cannot rise to meet supply. Now, it is clear that in a capitalist society, the mass of goods are distributed to the mass of men through the mechanism of wages. When wages do not reflect the real productivity of labor, when a small group appropriates most of the rewards to itself, then there will be a failure of demand. In such cases, the economy can only be stabilized by government spending, or by consumer lending, or by a combination of both. In the first place, the government becomes the consumer of last resort. And in the second, the class with excess funds lends it to others at usurious interest rates. And so the market's clear, at least for a time. In truth, both are stopgaps. The former leads to bloated governments and the latter to financial crises. Those who rail against the growth of government ought to look at the cause of that growth. And the cause is a lack of justice. If markets can't clear, governments are forced to intervene. Justice has been understood as an economic necessity since the time of Aristotle, and it was a staple of economic discussions throughout the 19th century. Adam Smith, in The Wealth of Nations, uses the term justice 100 times. And J.S. Mill, writing 100 years later, would use the term about as frequently. But the new utilitarian and Austrian economists were embarrassed by the term and wished to expunge it. A.E. Marshall, in his 1891 Principles of Economics, uses the term only 4 times, while W.S. Jevons, another founder of the new science, would use it only once, and that to deny that it should be used at all. The reason they wished to expunge justice was that it requires, as Aristotle noted, an act of judgment, one that could not be totally reduced to a calculation. But only calculation was regarded as scientific. GDP can be calculated. Justice could only be judged, and therefore justice had to go. The problem of judgment brings us to the next question, namely, what is the purpose of an economy? Without knowing what a thing is supposed to do, one cannot judge whether it is functioning. Yet, the new economists had a difficulty agreeing on what the purpose of their science was. A.E. Marshall, in the second sentence of his founding textbook, identifies it with individuals gathering wealth. And the most widely accepted definition seems to be that of Lyle Robbins. Economics is a science which studies human behavior as a relationship between ends and scarce means which have alternative uses. But this gets it down to behaviors and allocations. Economists have no training in the behavioral sciences. And the allocation of resources are engineering and political questions, and economists can add little to the conversation. Thus, economics became a science without a subject matter, declaiming on issues about which economists had no training whatsoever. Political economy, on the other hand, has a clear purpose. It deals with the material provisioning of society. On the basis of its purpose, we can make judgments about how well it is working. While there will always be disputes around the edges of the question, it is certainly easy enough to look around and see whether families are able from their wages to live at a level of dignity that is appropriate to their national society, and whether they can do so without undue reliance on government support or consumer borrowing, or without working undue hours. That is to say, judgment is not an impediment to the science, but the basis of every humane science. That brings us to the third and most important issue, property. Property is the most basic and fundamental of all economic relationships, and the degree of distribution of productive property determines the economic, social, and political character of a nation. If the ownership of productive property is concentrated in a few hands, is concentrated in the hands of the government, that nation will be a tyranny. If the ownership is concentrated in the hands of a few, that nation, that society will be an oligarchy. And if productive property is widely dispersed throughout society, that society will tend to be democratic. Note here that property is more intrinsic to the political character of the nation than is the method of voting. For example, America is formally a democracy, but huge sums of money are ours for his re-election campaign. The sources of that kind of money are limited, and hence the debate will be limited, as the politicians must be responsive to the sources of their power. But here we are concerned mainly with the economic consequences of property. And here we notice a curious absence in economic theory. Despite all the rhetoric devoted to private property, it really has no place in the theory. Indeed, it is just another factor of production assumed to be interchangeable with labor or capital and having no special significance. The distribution of property and the limits or lack of limits on its ownership have no place, get no discussion. Indeed, almost no thought is actually given to the origins and justifications of property. Rather, it is taken as a given, and no thought is given to where it comes from. But property has the power to completely change wage relationships. Men who have property, that is the means of production, are free to negotiate a wage contract or not, as they wish. But a man who has no other means of support must accept the terms offered. In the latter case, the wage contract becomes leonine, that is, based on the inequality of the parties. And leonine contracts are always about power. And the powers that be will always be able to play the workers off, either against each other or against the power of the state. We should be careful to note here that it is not, the issue is not about private property per se, but about the form and extent of that property. Property is natural to man. We might even say it is proper to him. It is as natural for a man to say, this is my house, or this is my land, as it is for him to breathe. Indeed, when a man cannot say, this is mine, then he really is less of a man. He might even find it difficult to breathe, or at least to draw a free breath. His rights and freedoms have been truly compromised. The socialists correctly analyzed the problems in terms of property, but they analyzed it in the wrong direction. Having ascertained that there were too few owners, they tried to ensure that henceforth there would be none. But what is really needed is to take the problem in the other direction, to make the mass of men more properly human by giving them what is proper to a man, namely property. The distribution of property is therefore the primary determining factor of any political economic system. Distributism is that form of political economy which emphasizes distributive justice, particularly in the matter of property. It should be noted here that the wide distribution of productive property is not something contrary to free markets, Indeed, all free market theory is based on the assumption that the production of any commodity is spread over a vast number of firms, such that no firm has any pricing power. They are all price takers rather than price makers. But in order for production to be spread over a vast number of firms, productive property has to be spread over a vast portion of the population. By dispersing capital, distributism enables the free market, while capitalism, in concentrating capital, destroys it. The free market theorists were correct in asserting that a truly free market could guarantee fair wages, eliminate economic rent, and disperse political power. But they were wrong to ignore the question of the distribution of property. The result was not a free market, but its opposite, an economy of collectives in which power was concentrated. These collectives have largely captured the state, so that in truth, there is little difference between state capitalism and state socialism. But it must be admitted that the very name, distributism, makes people worry. It conjures up an image of an all-powerful government taking property from some and giving it to others. But the truth is otherwise. Aside from exceptional cases, the wider distribution of property is not so much about what government should do as about what it should stop doing. Government itself is the biggest agent of the accumulation of property through its distribution of subsidies, privileges, tax breaks, monopolies, externalized costs, and the like. What a true free market really requires is free men, and what men require is the access to their own means of subsistence, which is precisely what capitalism denies them. The proper ground of freedom is one's own proper ground. What is denied to the mass of men must fall to a minority of men. Men who will then be the masters of society and the effective rulers of the state, co-opting it for their own ends. This is what has happened. The higher the piles of capitalism gathered in a few hands, the thicker the walls of government necessary to protect that capital. And capital and government combine to limit freedom and to restrict property. Capitalism is therefore not to be confused with the free market, but to be identified as its mortal enemy. And to confuse the one with the other is to totally misunderstand the reality of modern economic, social, and political life. But how should all of this affect Romania as it ponders its way forward through a collapsing euro, a declining United States, an uncertain China, and in general, a globalism whose internal contradictions are now becoming all too evident, and in which will shortly go the way of all the wild-eyed utopias of the 20th century? In a word, where should Romania look to solve Romania's problems? Let me again say that Romania should look to the Romanians. Now, I speak as a stranger, so you should take my words with some skepticism and demand of me rigorous proofs and actual examples. But I also speak as a friend, and so I beg you to give me a hearing. So why should Romania look to Romanians? In the first place, you are experienced. You have lived through all the wild-eyed schemes that the last century had to offer. Usually, you lived through them against your will, but you did live them as well as they could be lived. And as we say in the United States, you've been there, done that, got the t-shirt. The second reason is that you have the expertise, and you have it in the key areas of farming and manufacturing. Concerning farms, Upon independence, the government did return the land to its rightful owners, but withheld the tools, and then it pretty much ignored the needs of the farmers. Small farms were not considered compatible with the vision of global industry, and the farmer was an embarrassment to the bureaucrat. The villages themselves are frequently without even basic amenities, and hence not very attractive to the young. And yet, a small investment in paved or even graveled roads, in water and sewer systems, in electricity, would greatly improve both the quality of life in the villages and the productivity of the farms. Such things can easily be self-financed by rural banks, and mostly from resources already available within Romania. And beyond that, there should be developed marketing cooperatives, export financing, and even processing plants to add value and diversity and diversify industry in the countryside. Frankly, it is somewhat shameful that a nation like Romania should ever run a deficit in food production. Even these small steps would go a long way towards calling home Romania's scattered children. The next area is manufacturing. Here's an area where Romanians have proved themselves to be competent, efficient, and successful, and this was true even under the communists. But with the revolution, the people who created the wealth, that is the workers, and the resources were judged incompetent, and the resources of Romania were turned over to financiers and foreigners. There was a dogmatic insistence on something called privatization, which frequently took absurd forms. For example, in the name of getting the government out of the phone business, the Romanian phone company was sold to the Greek government. But apparently, nobody ever thought of selling these companies to the workers. The people who produced the wealth were judged incompetent to manage it and ineligible to own it. That is why today, Molend must compete with Morocco to make Romania's own products. To the degree that the French control your production, the French will be your masters. And if you sell your mines to the Canadians, Canada will control your wealth. Steps should be taken to diversify methods of ownership among Romanians. Cooperatives should be established in law and privileged in the tax codes. Financing should be available for worker buyouts and new cooperatives, both in rural and urban areas. Training centers can be established within the existing educational structure, and expertise can be offered to new enterprises. This is not an expensive program and can be self-financing, but it will go a long way towards building the wealth of Romanians, and just as important, keeping it in Romania. Now, I could extend the analysis into many other areas: mining, medicine, education, culture, and so forth, but I think you get the idea. But for many, if not for most, this will be a new idea, and new ideas should always be met with a healthy degree of skepticism. The 20th century has offered Romania any number of utopias, and Romania has sampled them all, and all without success. When confronted by the statement, "Try this, this will work," you should respond, "Where? When? Show us the system on the ground and working, and we will judge for ourselves." Indeed, the great problem with pure communism and pure capitalism is that there are not and never have been any working examples. Pure communism has never existed outside the walls of a monastery, and pure capitalism has never existed outside a banker's fantasies. But distributism is blessed with many examples on the ground over large scales and extended periods of time. You may go there and visit them, talk to the people, examine how they work, and judge for yourself whether it will work for Romania. In fact, there are many large and long-standing examples even nearby. Some of the more prominent ones include the Mondragon Cooperative Corporation of Spain, the cooperative economy of Emilia-Romagna in Italy, the Grameen Bank, the remarkable success of the employee-run Semco of Brazil, or the Fábricas Sin Patrones, factories without bosses of Argentina. There are employee stock ownership plans in cooperatives and mutual banks and insurance companies of every size and description. Let me just say a word about a couple of these. The Mondragon cooperatives were founded 60 years ago in the Basque country of Spain, a region that had been devastated by the Spanish Civil War. The founders were inspired by the works of their parish priest, Don José María Arizmendi. Today, it is a collection of 300 cooperatives and one of the largest corporations in Spain, with over 80,000 worker owners doing more than 24 billion in sales. But Mondragon is not just a business. It operates its own school system, research institutes, a university, training institutes, language institutes, a social welfare system, and a credit union, all of which are self-funded. Such a huge enterprise requires no outside investment or government support, but only the commitment and dedication of its own workers and its community. It is, oddly enough, the nearest thing in captivity to a functioning libertarian system, certainly more so than anything the libertarians have built. In Emilia-Romagna, the area in Italy around Bologna, worker cooperatives provide 40% of the GDP. Wages are about twice the average for Italy, and the standard of living is among the highest in Europe. Moreover, they have pioneered a new process of industrial production, which involves networking among small firms to cooperate on large projects, a feature which allows them to maintain small and medium-sized companies, but to compete internationally on big jobs. Now, I could go on talking about these examples and many more, but the point here is that there are examples which you can examine without having to take anybody's word for it, or to believe promises no one has ever seen in practice. I would urge the Academy, if it has not already done so, to fund research into these enterprises, since many are so close at hand. It would be a shame to ignore the lessons they have to offer. But the one thing I should note is that the networked distributism of northern Italy is very different from the hierarchical distributism of Basque Spain, which has a different structure from the Brazilian model of Semco, etc. For although it is called distributism, it is not really an ism at all, not really an ideology. It is a political economy, a set of guiding principles which permit of many practices. These principles do not dictate a one-size-fits-all approach, but can be, indeed must be, adopted to local conditions, customs, character, and culture. That is, these are systems which support culture, not contradict it. These are the systems, these are the tools which a culture uses to sustain itself and prolong itself. So the system, the economic system, does not become the enemy of the cultural system, and thereby, in a real sense, the enemy of the people. If Romania is to be prosperous, she must call her children home, and all the energy and talent that goes to serve others must come to serve Romania. But for this to happen, there must be places for them. There must be room for them, not merely to live, but to grow and to thrive. This will never happen under current conditions, and if things do not change, then Romania will be, for many of her youngest and brightest, a place to be from, rather than a home to be loved. Questions?
However, just one question. Romania right now is bankrupt and is living on credit. This is my deeply convinced on the situation after almost 22 years. Now, the question. However, still Romania has extremely strong natural resources, which is the basic point for distributism in general, for this concept. Now, to do such as things, you need people. You need people well educated, and you need people to live daily for their country. So the question is, how, what is your impression, what is your vision, how we can attract particularly the brain, minds, absolutely fabulous, which Romania has outside, how we can attract inside in order to serve Romania instead to serve other countries.
The French, yeah. Sure. Well, I mean, there's a couple of issues there. The one is the debt, and I keep coming back to this. Ceausescu, for all his faults, recognized the problem. Okay, I won't say I agree with his solution, but he recognized the problem. But when the debts are created by just a few taps of a computer, which is how most of this money is created, the moral status of that is not the same. That debt can be defaulted without a moral hazard arising. Okay, it's a little bit different. If you lend me, say, 100,000 lei, then I must, and it represents your labor, then I must pay you back. And if I have to take a second job and miss some meals and work a little harder to pay you back, then I just need to do that. But if you created that money through a legal monopoly on pressing buttons, it doesn't have the same moral status. If it's only a legal debt, then the law may be changed, okay, to modify the debt. So that, I think, is the way you need to think about Romania's debts to foreigners. What kind of status they have. Were they just real money involved? Or was it something that represented real savings and real labor? Or was it just a legal arrangement? And if it's just a legal arrangement, you can change it. But the second thing is that the thing they hold over countries is that they then can't get foreign exchange to buy the things because no country is self-sufficient. That's not true in Romania's case. Romania can always get foreign exchange because Romania has minerals and other things which the world wants. And will always give Romania pounds or euros or dollars to get these things. So Romania is not in the situation of, say, Greece, which doesn't have these same natural resources. So, they can get foreign currency by giving the world olives and feta cheese. But you have more valuable that's maybe a simplification. But nevertheless, Romania has more valuable assets. So once you realize you have this freedom, then you could create places for Romanians. I mean, you didn't have to sell your industries. These were some of the best industries in the Eastern Bloc. You didn't have to sell modifiers. You could have developed them internally, and you still can do so. And once you do all that, then it's easy to open up spaces in the economy for the people you need to keep here, which is the young people. I mean, you don't want to become a nation people who look like me. You need to be, children really are the future. And if your children are in Spain, you have no future.
But the banks are in foreign hands, so what are we going to do? I mean, radical measures. What kind of radical measures do you think?
No, I think you can nationalize the banks.
Okay, nationalize.
Because banking is a public creation of money is a public power. It's not like you're nationalizing, say, somebody's a farm where somebody's actually making something real by their own labor. You're nationalizing a public power to create money, which is what a bank does. So they only have it from a legal monopoly to begin with. So you can change the legal monopoly. That's not even radical.
So that's why the government hurry up to sell these potential. Minings in Romania are the purpose of government to be sold. I'm talking about Russia, Montana. Now is in a process of privatization. That's why I should try to explain that our objective must be for the long term. Distributism to be implemented in that sector. But we need a set of law. We need a set of support, in Parliament.
We need other people. The law. We need other people to understand the principle.
Mm-hmm.
The point is, if you allow me, this based on, of course, on my first question, that Russia, Montana, in my opinion, is right now, after 7 years, 8 years, start this stupid concept of privatization, is the symbol of disaster. Because this project, call it project, divided Romania already in two sides. One side, which from poor level of life, they are attracted from the cash from the guys, and another one which try to recognize the history and try to recognize the value of this country and the sovereignty of us. The idea is that it's not a debate, and this is a huge problem of this country. Doesn't exist debate, full stop. They are just discussion, conversation, whatever, but it's not debate. And because it's not debate, you cannot arrive around the table with a solution, which in my opinion have to be just Romanian solution. Just Romanian solution. Romania has the capacity and the people to call such as things. Now the point is, if you allow me, one, which is also from my side, one extremely heavy problem is that all these guys here, which we talk about, from Romanian parliament or from another, they cannot realize these things without the help from outside.
Because of funding.
Yeah, this is the point. And this is very critical because you can see, we can have a lot of value added from outside, which we had also before. If I'm talking about particularly this building from Karol I or for Frederick Ferdinand, but we can have also some negative aspects from outside. Again, which the situation which is right now in Romania is totally dependent by the corruption, not only from inside, by the corruption and the manipulation from outside. And this is the key issue.
But you know, the problem is that, one, the first place, the issue is not, in the first instance, political, it's cultural. That is, if you regard the mountain as just another commodity, you know, it could be grapes or it could be gold, okay, then who owns it isn't much of an issue. If you regard the mountain as one of the key aspects of Romanian economic and cultural life, okay, then it makes a lot of difference who owns it. It makes a great difference who owns it. So, if you start from the place of culture, then the political debate changes. And without the recognition that, well, of course you don't want to be nationalistic and exclude all foreign ownership of everything. Nevertheless, you can't turn over ownership of key national assets to foreigners, you know? This is to surrender to the Turk before the fight. It's no different, except the Turk has a bond rather than a scimitar. Frankly, it's at least more manly to lose to a scimitar than to merely a bondsman. No other question? Current moment of, you know, this is about the fourth stage of reorganization. Because it can't be, there can be no final state. That just isn't given to mortal men to have a final state like that. So it still always remains something in process.
Yeah, I have an issue that I want to discuss here. I wanted to make a big shift, change a model, make such a big transformation. We have to educate people. We have to change their mind frame. But how to do that? How to promote distributism? How to promote the new economy when people in charge, they don't want to listen to it? And I'm looking, even in this room, how many professors, economic professors are here to listen to us, to find out of something new? Very few, maybe none. So they're not interested in changing the model. They're not interested in finding out that there is an alternative. So how we want the people to change this if the professionals that are supposed to impose, to push the change, are not listening? They still believe, like in a religion, in the old system, even though there are clear signs that the old system has collapsed. So this is the problem in Romania. People are not listening, are not interested in finding out, because they only looking to the old system that it's still in power and has still the money and the money. That's a problem. So how can we educate people for a new economy?
A problem that isn't often stated, as a matter of fact, you're not allowed to state it. And the problem is democracy itself. Because democracy is often looked at as the solution to the problem. But democracy requires strong countervailing institutions. It requires, so long as democracy is the answer, money will be the answer. Because politicians need money. As we say in America, money is the mother's milk of politics. Okay? All right? But what democracy really needs is strong, non-democratic institutions. It needs strong universities, okay, who can speak with authority to hold the politicians accountable. It needs strong business organizations who can speak with authority. It needs strong farming organizations who can speak with authority, okay? It needs all of these other organizations are more important, I think, than the legislature. And if you have a legislature without these other institutions, what you will inevitably have is an elected tyranny. Okay. But when all of these other institutions are strong, then money won't be the only factor in politics. There will be other people who can speak with strong voices. So other institutions are, in a sense, prerequisite to a democracy, and without them, all you have is a contest of money.
Professional, like medieval business.
Any alternative we choose needs a change. That change needs an effort. And these people now isn't able to pay this effort. Even if he wants an effort. This effort must be done for an economic purpose, an external, to say so, effort. But it must be supported by an inner effort, by a change of mentality. This change of mentality must be, to be sustainable, must be on Christian values based on Christian. This Christian-based effort is very hard to do this moment in Romania. So that an economic alternative without this inner effort, I think, will be not, to say so, on a long period to be moved. So that for those who can support from inner effort the external change, it can be an alternative. For the others, I think it will be a new disappointment.
Well, I didn't mention, and I should have mentioned, primarily among all of the other institutions that hold democracy to account, the one of premier place and status is the church. And this is especially true in a country like Romania, more so in Romania than in the United States, because the Romanian Orthodox Church covers the vast majority of people. And it's also true that prior to a change of politics, you need a metanoia, a change of heart. Okay? Okay. So, in this sense, Romania is uniquely positioned to be able to do this, because I think even Romanians who are not particularly religious are still Romanian Orthodox. That is, the church still has some authority for them. Okay. So a lot will depend on the actions of the church, on how willing the church is to get involved with change. That's really an area I can't speak to. It's internal, it's in Romania, but I would say that's the place to look. Good. Thank you all for coming and listening, and I hope it was useful in some way. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.